I'm on, okay. I'm on. I'll stand down here so I don't keep banging into that microphone up there and save your ears somewhat. I'm a nervous guy. My hands move. Very nervous about sharing today. I thank Josh for the opportunity, but never again do I want to know 2 months in advance the day and the time and the topic that I'll be sharing. I don't want to go through that torture again. I don't even want to go through last night again because I haven't slept. I thank you for the information in the study materials. I actually have a lot of notes. For those of you that have heard me in the past, I tend not to have a lot of notes. Sometimes it's just written on the back of a napkin. I like to think that I share from here. With this information that I got leading up to this, the more I looked at it, the more I saw how appropriate this message is for Oak Hill today. How important the series about being resilient, about standing firm in faith and in love in the midst of what we have going on. It's been an interesting couple months here at Oak Hill. And I really believe God's calling us to be resilient. I believe he's encouraging us to be resilient. I believe he's showing us that we can be. I believe he's prompting us to do that, and I believe we are doing it. I hope today be able to show you a lot of those things that are already going on. But I also hope, as much as I can be an encouragement, I hope I also can be a voice of warning, a voice of opening our eyes to a big picture, like Josh shared, but a picture of what could be if things didn't go the way they need to go, or if things begin to creep in to Oak Hill and we begin to divide. I hope I'll be able to share some of those things. Those are not the type of things that I want to sit up here and share. I don't like being in the correcting role. I don't like being in the kind of role that makes waves. So pray for me. Bear with me as I attempt to maybe do some of that also. But ultimately, my heart is one to be an encouragement to you, to the things that I see are going on. I've said before, I'm not the guy with a long list of credentials. I'm not the guy well-versed in a lot of things. I'm the guy that sits right next to you. I think of Bob and Christian. They're the guys that sit right next to you also. We've performed, or they have, and I will, a little bit of a different role than what we're accustomed to. We're accustomed to hearing sound doctrine from our leaders, Pastor Josh, Pastor Eric, Pastor Glenn. We're accustomed to hearing what God has invested in them for us. But the role of Bob and Christian and myself is to say, I've been sitting right next to you all these weeks, months, and years. And give me the opportunity to share what I've been hearing and feeling from that seat right next to you. And if maybe by you hearing that, you'll say, gee, maybe I've been hearing some of those things also. So I hope we can accomplish some of that today. I hope we can continue to be encouraged to take all that, apply it to a bigger picture, and say, maybe I can trust you, God, for more. Maybe I can be open, excited for what you're doing and gonna do. Open our eyes, Lord, that we may see. So we're going to continue in Corinthians. We're going to be in chapter 3 today, verses 5 through 17. But a little bit of background about the book, a continued reminder. Make no mistake that this letter had warnings in it. Make no mistake that Paul, when he wrote this letter, was extremely, extremely concerned. Maybe even we could use the word worried. You see, it was only a couple years before that he had spent the better part of a year and a half with the Corinthian church in its formation, in its starting, in its building process. He'd invested much in them. God had invested so much in them through Paul, through Apollos, as we'll hear about, and others. But Paul began to hear some stories. He began to hear some things that were, well, they were alarming. He began to hear of, well, quarrels amongst the Corinthian church. He began to hear of lawsuits. He began to hear of people taking sides. I follow Paul. I follow Apollos. I like the way he teaches, or I like the thoughts and ideas that this one's presenting. He began to hear stories of this city, busy life culture that the Corinthian church lived in, of starting to creep, not in, but back in to the life that they once had. A couple years ago, they had accepted Paul's message and were moving forward at a solid pace, learning and accepting so much truth. So much so that Paul even saw fit to move on from there after he had planted, after he had allowed another to water, to sow, to help make it grow. Paul had moved along, and a couple years went by, and then he began to hear some of these stories of things going back, things taking a turn. Imagine the concern. Imagine the despair. Imagine the difficulty that he had writing a letter like some of the things that we've been hearing about these last few weeks, about the encouragement to be resilient, but the need to be resilient and stand firm. Imagine, if you would, sitting in a seat like you are now, being called and gathered together, saying, it's time to meet again, church. And then hearing that we've received a letter. We've received a letter from Paul. Oh, how we loved him. Oh, how we loved the time he spent with us and shared with us. Oh, I can remember that. What a time it was. My life was changed during that time. Imagine, if you would, sitting in the seat in preparation of hearing that letter. And then hearing some of the things that Paul had to share. I applaud Paul because in the midst of sharing the tough things, he also focused them immediately back in the right direction, in a narrow direction, pointed them towards God and Christ, and the need to stay focused, stay resilient, stay standing firm in faith and in love in him. I appreciate that Paul was able to do both those things because both needed to be done. They needed to be warned and they needed to be encouraged. And Paul does this. If you can take a look at the big picture as you continue through this book, that you'll continue to see that he does both things. Both things. As preparation to hear what he has to say to us in 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verses 5 through 17, let me just take one little step back and read the verses that Bob shared from last week, because I think that kind of sums up a lot of Paul's concerns and feelings and the turmoil that he was going through, the things that he saw that were upsetting, but yet were also encouraging because he knew what God can and will do. I'm going to read it in a very sarcastic version, the Message, to maybe drive home that point a little bit more. But here's the verses that Bob shared from last week. And let me, seeing that I haven't done this in a while, I don't know which glasses I need to use. But here we go. 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verses 1 through 4. We've been being encouraged to have our Bibles with us. So take a look at what you have. Try and listen to a different version that I'm going to share from. See how it maybe expands upon it or gives a different take or twist. See how it emphasizes some of these points. But for right now, friends, I'm completely frustrated by your unspiritual dealings with each other and with God. You're acting like infants. Bob spoke about our maturity last week. In relation to Christ, capable of nothing much more than nursing at the breast. Well, then I'll nurse you, since you don't seem to be capable of anything more. As long as you grab for what makes you feel good or makes you look important, are you really much different than a babe at the breast? Content only when everything's going your way. Some of the things that are going to warn us about being resilient in our service. When one of you says, I am on Paul's side, and another says, I'm for Apollos, aren't you being childish? This letter was indeed corrective. Make no mistake. This letter was urgent. May I go so far to say that it was definitely for them timely. And I've already suggested that we're in the midst of a timely series about being encouraged to be resilient. Interesting note, this letter did not accomplish what Paul fully had hoped for. There was a need for more letters. There was a need for another quick visit and another longer visit. There was a need for more things to be added later on in 2 Corinthians that we're not even getting into. So as earth-shaking and as shattering as this letter was, it didn't accomplish everything that Paul had hoped for. Something we need to hear, something we need to understand. It was one tough letter and one tough pill to swallow. This must have been a tough read, and it must have been a tough listen if we were to put ourselves in their seats when they heard this. At the same time, I say it again, this letter is filled with love, with hope, with a guy like Paul not giving up, not writing off a people, not washing his hands and walking away from them. No, he stayed right in the midst of it, continued to serve in the area that God called him to, continued to lead as a builder of that church. He didn't walk away from those responsibilities. He continued to know the call that God had upon his life and continued to fulfill that. Because he had hope. He had a love for them people. He had a balance of praise and recognition of the powerful things that God had already done and is doing and will do in their lives. He had that perspective, even in the midst of having to say some tough things. Let's take a look at today's passage. Let's not just pull out the obvious problems that we'll hear, but let's see how Paul points to them, points to God, points them back, refocuses them on the one true object of our affection and our love. The source of anything we might see as accomplishment, the source, it's him. Paul takes some moments to point us back in that direction. 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verses 5 through 17. I'm in the English Standard Version that we quite often read from. It goes like this. What then? It's a continuation of the verses that we heard last week talking about the situation with Apollos and Paul. So it continues in verse 5. What then is Apollos? What is Paul? Servants through whom you've believed, as the Lord assigned to each. I planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the increase, gave the growth. So neither he who plants nor he who waters is anything, but only God who gives the growth. He who plants and he who waters are one, and each will receive his wages according to his labor, for we are God's fellow workers. You are God's field, God's building. To take it from a different angle, Paul goes on to get away from the farmer image. He goes to the builder image. Maybe this is something we can understand if we've built things. Maybe we're not all farmers. Maybe we've been builders. Maybe we can understand how things are built up. Let's hear what Paul has to say about it from that perspective, some of the same things. According to the grace given to me, like a skilled master builder, I laid a foundation. And someone else is building upon it. Apollos is helping in that task. For no one can lay a foundation other than that which is laid, which is Jesus Christ. The firm foundation, if you would. Now, if anyone builds on the foundation with gold, silver, precious stones, wood, hay, straw, each one's works will become manifest. For the day will disclose it, because it will be revealed by fire, and fire will test the sort of work each has done. Our works, our service, will have tests, we'll have trials, we'll have obstacles in our path. We'll have opportunities to be resilient in the midst of those. Be prepared. Be looking. If the work that anyone has built up on the foundation survives, he will receive a reward. If anyone's work is burned up, he will suffer loss, though he himself will be saved, but only as through fire. Do you not know that you are God's temple, whom he's invested so much in, and that God's Spirit dwells in you? If anyone destroys God's temple, God will destroy him, but God's temple is holy, and you are that temple, Oak Hill. You are a part of it. Seeing that today's theme is resilient in service, let's look at how Paul views himself and Apollos as servants, as an example for them and even to us. They set themselves up to live their life before this people in Corinth, being examples of a servant, being examples of doing what God had called them to do, being resilient in that, in the midst of trials, in the midst of obstacles. But they put their life out there on the line in front of them, and they lived it. What are some of the characteristics that will help us keep focus? Resilient. How about this? Standing firm in faith and in love, in service to him. One thing that jumps out to me first, although it wasn't one of the first verses, is verse 10. According to the grace of God given to me, Paul knew he was called. Paul had an understanding of what God was asking him to do. How was he able to be resilient in this servant line of work? Because he knew and understood what God had called him to do. He had begun to understand the specifics of it, to be a builder, helping lay a foundation, knowing when it was time to step aside and let someone else take over and do some of the tasks that are going to continue that building. That's not an easy thing to do. That's not an easy thing for us to do. It's very hard to have a passion for something and know what is yours to do in the midst of that passion and what is not yours to do. Oh, if we could see with eyes like that, how much smoother things would go. Paul knew he was called. He knew his calling. He knew the specifics. And he knew that because he was called, he had confidence. He had faith that he was equipped. Do you know? Do you know some of the things that you've been called to do? Do you know some of the narrowing and the specifics of some of the areas that he's called you to do these things? Do you know that if it's from him, that he's equipping, that he's gifting you to do those very things? Are you sure of that? Isn't that exciting? To know that He's entrusted, but he's gifted, he's called, and he's blessing you in that. We need to know those things in order to be resilient in service. Passions and giftings in regards to service come with abundant blessing. These passions that he's put in our heart. There's abundant blessings that come in that. But also, if you can hear me in this, there's potential baggage. There's potential warning signs. What God is doing in you and through you doesn't necessarily mean that everyone should do what you're doing. Doesn't necessarily mean that everyone's going to jump on board because all of a sudden you have a passion for something. It's a hard place to walk. It can be a lonely place to walk when God's doing something in you first and maybe others aren't following along with that. It can be a source of personal discouragement. It can be a source of division. We're looking at the things that we got to look at, looking at the things that we have to consider when we're talking about being resilient in service. What God is doing in you doesn't necessarily mean it's for everyone. But it might mean that you are one to keep that banner lifted high. You are the one to keep that passion out in the forefront. You are the one to maintain that position that God has called you to do and not waver from it. You are the one that is to stand firm in those matters in faith and in love. Keep it going. Keep that passion going that God has called you to do. Because some of those specifics that you're going to do and are doing, well, I'm not going to do them, most likely. Bruce, you're probably not going to do them. But the guy next to you might. Person behind you might. We're all called to support. We're all called to recognize and listen what God is doing in all of our lives. And we're called to be an encouragement of those things. We're called to minister together in love and help those things to happen. Keep the focus. Keep the focus is the encouragement. Remain resilient, standing firm in faith and love in him. A broader look at this passage, Paul knew this was by no means his alone. There are other laborers in the field, other necessary tasks. It should never be my ministry. You want an early warning sign? When you start to feel ownership, when you start to feel that things won't go along unless I do them, it should never be my ministry. How do you maintain that balance of walking in a God-given passion and not feeling ownership of it, not feeling responsibility for it in an ownership type of way? It's a tough line to walk. It's not an easy thing to do. It's something that I would say most of us would need help in sorting out and walking in. I know I would. I know shortly after Sandy and I got saved, about a year or so afterwards, we were asked to lead a class, lead a group of individuals through a 2-year program of memorizing scripture and studying God's word. And the pastor sat down with us, came to our house, and was going to begin to help us as we prepared to lead. And I thought, oh, great, he's going to give us all the verses that we need and all the things that we need to say. And I'd have 2 months in advance to prepare and think about that wonderful day. And in the midst of that 2 months, 60 days, I'd have, well, a lot less than 60 days of sleep. But you know what he chose to sit down and talk to us about? The very first thing on his plate to encourage us was, don't be proud. Don't have pride. Don't let pride seep in. A warning sign of some of the downfalls of the blessings that we can receive from being a servant. We need to see the potential downfalls as much as the potential for the great and awesome things that he wants to do. Third thing I saw in these verses was keeping focus. Another concern Paul had and refocus he gave was verses 6 and 7. The focus back was, but God gave the growth. So neither he who plants nor he who waters is anything, but only God who gives the growth. Man, if we can keep shooting the praise, the acknowledgement, the displaying of who really is at control in all of this, who really is the one making things happen, boy, if we can keep that in focus, boy, will we be able to be resilient in service. Let me, if I would, take these same verses that we're talking about today and share them also with you from the translation called The Message. I love doing that. I loved seeing another twist on what is said. I love, well, quite frankly, probably the overemphasizing of some of the thoughts that take place when reading The Message. But just let it spur something, some thought in you, some possibilities. Listen, if you could, this morning. Same verses that we've been talking about, verses 5 through 17 of chapter 3. Who do you think Paul is anyway? Or Apollos, for that matter? Servants, both of us. Servants who waited on you as you gradually learned to entrust your lives to our mutual master. As you gradually learned how you were a part of the planting, how you were a part of the foundation building, how you've been gradually having your gifts refined and narrowed and focused. We each carried out our servant assignment. I planted the seed, Apollos watered the plants, but God made you grow. God is always the one who will make us grow. It's not the one who plants or the one who waters who is the center of this process, but God who makes things grow. Planting and watering, get ready for this one. Planting and watering are menial tasks. Talk about shocking us into reality. At minimum wage. How exciting. What makes them worth doing is the God we are serving. You happen to be God's field in which we are working. Or to put it another way, you are God's house. Using the gift God gave me as a good architect, I designed blueprints. Apollos is putting up the walls. Let each carpenter who comes on the job take care to build on the foundation which has been laid. Remember, there's only one foundation. the one already laid, Jesus Christ. Take particular care in picking out your building materials. Eventually, there's going to be an inspection. If you use cheap or inferior materials, the quick path, if you would, you'll be found out. The inspection will be thorough and rigorous. There'll be obstacles. There'll be temptations along the way, folks. You won't get by with a thing. If your work passes inspection, fine. If it doesn't, your part of the building would be torn out and started over. But you won't be torn out. You'll survive, just barely. You realize, don't you, that you are the temple of God, and God himself is present in you? No one will get by with vandalizing God's temple. You can be sure of that. God's temple is sacred. His work is sacred. And you, remember, are that temple. I share all these things to share just a couple more points. One is recognizing, if we could get at the point where we could recognize obstacles, some of the obstacles that could be in our way, if we could put ourselves in that position to be able to recognize some of these warnings as they're happening or maybe before they're happening, that would be great. Two, on the flip side of that, if we could also hear the encouragement. If we could also see with eyes the things that God has done, is doing, and will do. If we could get those two things out of today, just an openness to examine those two things, that would be huge. Whenever Gary hears that I'm going to preach, Gary Allen, he wants to know if there's going to be props. I won't let you down. There'll be props. So my first prop today, Gary, is you. Come on down. You betcha. He does not know he is a prop, nor do the other people who might be props know either. Keep them doors open. There might be some running out. For those of you that it's your first experience, I'm different. Gary,
Yes, sir.
I'm going to walk in this direction. You're going to walk in that direction. And you're going to casually bump into me. Just a nod. Okay? All right, so I'm walking down the street. I'm being about my business of service to the Lord. Let's see what happens. What was that? What just happened? Sometimes in the midst of our service, in the midst of the things that God has called us to do, we receive just a glancing blow, just a little nudge, just a little eye-opener, just a little warning signal. Ooh, something might not be right here. Something might be starting to go a little bit wrong in our thinking. Hopefully, we can feel that little nudge or understand it. Sometimes those warning signals come in different forms. And I need Jackson to come this morning. Jackson knows karate. Is it karate? What's the exact? Jiu-jitsu. You know what I want you to do? I want you to come over here. I want you to give me one of those karate chop things as a symbol of the direct attack we might see. The one we might see coming right at us. the one we might have to decide how we're going to defend. Sometimes we don't even see the direct attacks. See, we're looking at things today that might set us off course. So Jackson, if you would you give me one of those karate chops, right? But I want you to give it to me like right here and no lower than here and like no wider than right there. I got a nice strong bone there. All right, so you ready? You're gonna give me one of them? You know what, wait a second. Gary, you like acting, right? Yes. Gary, I nominate you to be my stuntman. All right, Jackson, go ahead, give it to him. Oh, that was weak. yeah, you like one of those black belt thingies?
I'm a gray belt.
I could give you my black belt.
I got one.
Okay, all right, so Jackson, the jiu-jitsu expert, let him have it. That was good, that was good. Sometimes we have attacks that come right at us. And we don't see those. Sometimes we do. And we're not prepared to defend. Sometimes we are. Hopefully, we're growing. Hopefully, we're learning each step of the way to become a little bit more resilient. Gabe, can I have you come help us? Come on.
Is he gonna hurt me too?
No, I think it's gonna hurt me this time. And I think I'm gonna let you be a part of it too.
Oh, hurting you?
So go ahead, you guys, give me some pushes and some bumps and rough me up a little bit. Go ahead, come on, let me have it. I mean, you gotta enjoy it. You gotta smile. You gotta let me have it. Sometimes when we're in the midst of service, we feel like we're being pounded from every side. There's an obstacle on every turn that we take. There's something in our path that blocks us every step of the way, and we don't understand it. Sometimes when we're in that position, we lose heart. We get frustrated. We almost, or maybe even sometimes we do, give up. Oh, that we can recognize some of the obstacles. Oh, that we can recognize some of the opportunities to practice resilience, to practice standing firm in the midst of it, no matter what the karate chops are, no matter what the nudges are, no matter what the bombardment is from every side. Oh, that we could begin to recognize. Thank you, guys. Oh, wait a minute. I need my two more. I'll let you get back to the sound. I need you guys to help me with one more. Although this time, I think you guys might have to be the object of bombardment, of fear. You guys might have to be the guys that are portraying, oh no, what am I gonna do now? Because you're gonna face that in life. I need you guys to lay down right here. One right here, this way. One right here next to him, this way. Oh, this is gonna be good. I'm glad it's not me this time receiving all that. You got insurance? You got insurance? You got insurance for these guys? Okay. My favorite wrestler growing up was Jimmy Superfly Snuka. Anybody know him? Anybody remember him? He was the best. Now, Jimmy Superfly Snuka, for you guys who might not know, used to climb up to the top rope of the wrestling ring. And he would spread his arms out like this. He was over 6 foot. He was 230-something pounds, and he would jump off the top rope. Did you guys ever go swimming before and jump off a diving board and do a belly flop? Yeah, Jimmy Superfly Snooker, menacing, had hair wilder than mine, which it might be hard to believe, would jump off the top rope and his hair would fly out and his body would come at you from 10 feet in the air, plop, belly flop, right on top. I might need a running head start to do. Oh, I might need you to just line me up, Gary. Guys, I wouldn't do that to you. Thank you for helping me demonstrate. Sometimes, we're going to face things that are just, you guys can go ahead and take a seat. Sometimes it's overwhelming. The obstacle is overwhelming. Sometimes it's huge. Sometimes we don't know what we're going to do. Sometimes maybe like the scenario we just went through where we're being bounced around from all sides. Sometimes this overwhelming one is the same thing. Sometimes we need to definitely pray. Sometimes we need to ask for help. God has given us each other. That's provision. Sometimes it's big, and we need to ask for help. I know Sandy knows me that I don't like to ask for help. Maybe it's a guy thing. Is it a guy thing? Guys don't like to ask for help? I remember one time Sandy got so mad at me that we were getting rid of a bureau in our house upstairs in my daughter's room. It was a big bureau, and, well, I didn't like to ask for help. And she wasn't helping me carry that bureau down the stairs. There was no way she was going to be able to lift it. So I took the bureau, and I lifted it up on its edge, and I rolled it over, somersault, another move. I laid a blanket down on the top of the stairs, and I rolled it one more time onto that blanket, and I slid that bureau down the stairs and out the front door, rolled it out the front steps, got it into the lawn. It was just going to be thrown away and destroyed anyways, but I got it out there, and lo and behold, at that time, Sandy pulled in the driveway. And she saw what I was doing, and she was furious. She was mad, and she let me have it. You help everybody. You're always gone doing something for somebody, but yet you won't even ask for help. Sometimes when the mountain presents itself, guys, gals, we got to ask for help. We got to ask for help. It ain't easy. Nobody said it was going to be easy. That was the one thing I wanted to share with you today. The other was encouragement. With all the concern that Paul had, he was encouraged by the things that God had done, because he knew. He was there when it happened. He was there when their lives were changed. He was encouraged by the things that God was doing. And he was encouraged and had faith to believe in the things that God will do. Oak Hill, you're in the midst of a time of putting to practice resilience. You're in the midst of a time of opportunity. And I, the person who's sitting in the seat right next to you, I'm seeing with eyes of encouragement. I'm seeing great things that God is doing. I saw 3 young people today that have recently begun and are continuing to take the lead in this time when we have needs and holes in our ministry here. They're taking the lead to put it on the line, step out in faith, and do. I'm encouraged at the things God is doing. I'm encouraged by a person like Kristen stepping out and filling an immediate hole. We went without any, what do you call it? There was no gap. The need presented itself and it was filled. Amazing. When we heard the news, my first impression was, what are we going to do? God made it happen. I'm encouraged by the things that are happening. You want opportunities to serve? See Kristen. She might need your help. I'm encouraged that there's a prayer group faithfully meeting. I'm encouraged that, well, they've come to us and said, we need to pray. We need to pray more. We need to have corporate times of prayer. We've had one. We need to find other opportunities to do that because, well, as they shared with me, not everybody can come on a Wednesday night, for instance, which is the time that we had one. Not everybody can come. Not everybody can come the time that they're having a prayer meeting that God has laid upon their heart to do. Not everybody can come at those times. We need to be a church that provides opportunity for prayer, especially during this time. We're going to have another opportunity today as we have the question and answer time with Eric. We're also going to have a time of corporate prayer. We're trying to look for opportunities to be doing the things that we need to do. I'm encouraged by the things that are going on and already happening. I'm excited that people are sharing their passions and opportunities. Mary came to me and said, God's laid it on my heart to pray for our community, to pray that God would put people in leadership in our community, Christian men and women who can be in positions in our town that we can pray for, that we can be so glad that they're in position making godly decisions on behalf of our community. She shared some of those opportunities with me, a whole list of them. If you have any interest in being involved in your community, see Mary. She has a passion for that. She's praying for it. She's encouraging others to pray for it. I told her I'm probably not the one to take part in some of those, the political venues. That's not me. I was wise enough to know that. I have a dislike for meetings and such. My father was in politics and it didn't do a lot to encourage me to want to pursue that. But it's not for everybody, but it is for someone. It is for some of us. And if we had godly men and women in those positions. God gives you a passion, share it. Share it. Pray about it. Encourage others. Don't let it go aside. I think of sharing passions. I think of Gary Shalafo sharing just within the last couple months his passion for the church grounds and the church building, and sharing that there's many needs, just letting us know what's on his heart, letting you know that there's opportunities out there. We need to let each other know what the opportunities are. I think of the many possible opportunities that are out there to lift up his name. I think of people sharing about their excitement about the open-ended possibility that Oak Hill Bible Church might be in right now. I think of Martha coming forward last week to pray for the lady that came to share about us about the, I got to get this name right, Your Options Medical? Your Options Medical. But Martha took a moment to say, I'm excited about what God is going to do? Are you excited about what God is going to do? Are you excited about the opportunity to say, I trust you, God. This is going to be difficult, but I trust you. I look with faith and love about the things that you're going to do. I'm beginning to be encouraged. I think it's great. I'm excited about the things that God has done. I think back just a couple months ago when we had the Advent season. We had over 10 different people take part in writing a devotional. God was doing a work of preparation in us for continuing the work here before we even knew we were going to have some holes to fill. God was already prompting us, like he was these girls, to take a step in doing a little bit more, a little bit something different. I know I wrote one, Craig and Sandy and Bob and others. We had over 10 people take part in doing something, a lot of us, something that we've never done before. I'm encouraged by the work that God's doing in preparation. I'm encouraged by the foundation that God has laid. 5 years of ministry, 27 years worth of ministry. What he's done here in this church over the course of many years, even beyond these guys, he's been laying a foundation. And if I would say, be bold, so bold to say, maybe it was for just such a time as this. He has invested much. Are you ready? Are you ready to be resilient in service?